So let me start out with a question. What is the craziest thing you've ever tried for a remedy for being sick? Just think about that for a second. Like, go back in your mind. Maybe it was just last month, but what is the craziest thing you've ever tried as a remedy to your sickness, whatever that sickness might be? Think about that. Hold on to that for a second. I remember as a little kid, my grandmother, she had this weird remedy about colds. And I never knew about this until one summer, me and my brother and my sister, we were hanging out at their house for the whole week, and I started to get a cold. And so my grandmother said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some hot mustard and put it all over your chest right before you go to bed every night. Anybody ever heard of this? I think, okay, see, I thought my grandmother was crazy. Like, she said that people actually believe this. So every night before I went to bed, she would get this hot mustard and she would just spread it all over my chest before I went to bed. I thought she was the craziest person in the world. And for some reason, every day when I woke up, I wanted a hot dog. I have no idea, but it didn't fix my cold, but I ate a lot of hot dogs that week. But you might have some other crazy things that you have tried. In fact, there's this one home remedy they say if you ever deal with warts is duct tape. Believe it or not, duct tape. See, I'm convinced duct tape fixes everything. Did I get an amen? I mean, duct tape fixes everything, and supposedly it fixes warts as well. All you need to do, this is what you need to do if you have a wart that you can't get rid of, take a little bit of duct tape, about a little bit larger than the size of the wart, put it on there, clean your wart, put it on there, keep it on there for 3 days without taking it off. And then at the end of the 3 days, take it off, wipe off any dead skin that might be there, and then repeat the process. Put another new piece of duct tape on there, 3 days, and then do it over and over again until the wart is gone. And supposedly, it's supposed to work. I've never tried it, so maybe you can try it. That's not that bad. But in the 18th century, people in England believed the way to get rid of warts was to kill a mouse, cut it in two, take the half that had the most blood in it, and then take that and rub it over the wart. Okay, and then supposedly this was to get rid of your wart. I would like to stick with the duct tape. I don't know about you, but I think I'll just go with the duct tape. All kinds of things. In the 18th and 19th century, doctors were commonly known to, when patients had a stuttering issue, their remedy was to cut off part of their tongue. Believe it or not. Like, that seems like the opposite of what you should do, right? Like, the opposite, like that seems like it would only compound the problem. But for whatever reason, they believe that to help stuttering, cut off some of your tongue and that would fix the problem. I don't know if that's true or not. Here's another one that I just read about this week is if you have foot odor. Some of us have foot odor, no perfect people allowed, right? Some of us deal with that. And they say get some vodka, right? Vodka works, okay? Not drinking it, although that probably wouldn't hurt either. But you take some vodka, get a rag, drench the rag with vodka, and then rub your foot nonstop with it for about 10 minutes. Don't clean it. And then the next day, your foot odor should be gone. And you repeat this as bad as however bad it is. So the conclusion I've come to is duct tape and vodka fix everything in life, pretty much. But we all have these crazy ideas of what might work in a remedy, and sometimes we get so desperate we'll try anything. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I have. And today we're actually going to look at a group of people who were so desperate they were willing to try almost anything to get better. Now, in case you haven't been with us, last week we started this series called Miracles. And we're simply asking this question: what would it take for you and I this year to become more aware of, more expectant of, and more dependent upon the miracles of God in our lives? We're really wrestling with that question. What would it take for us to become more aware of the miracles? Because here's the thing. I think deep down, we all hope for miracles. We all want miracles to happen in our lives. We all want to believe in miracles. But so many times, our default is our logical, practical side oftentimes will get in the way of that and will prevent us from fully embracing the impossible in our lives. Happens over and over again, and it creates this tension, this constant tension in your life and in my life between our hope and desire for miracles to happen and our skepticism of their reality in life. See, I said last week, the problem isn't that God isn't willing to do miracles in our lives today, just like he did in the Bible times. The problem is we are unwilling to believe that he can and that he will. And so we put these stumbling blocks and these roadblocks in our lives, preventing God from doing the impossible in our lives. And so what we're doing is we're exploring these incredible, mind-blowing, eye-opening miracles of Jesus, the supernatural of Jesus while he lived here on planet Earth. And as we said last week, these weren't any just kind of sleight of hand magic tricks or fancy illusions. This was the raw power of God working in and through his Son, Jesus Christ. And the question I left with last week is, and if Jesus could do all those things, if he can walk on water, if he can calm a raging storm, if he can bring a dead man back from the grave, imagine what he can do in my life and in your life, right? That's the point of this whole series. Helping us discover what can happen when the limitations of life collide with the power of God. That's what a miracle is, when our limitations collide with the power of God. And it brings us to today's miracle in John chapter 5, starting in verse 1. John chapter 5, starting in verse 1, it reads this way. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. Now that sounds nice, doesn't it? Palm trees, a pool, 5 covered porches. Sounds a lot fancier than our community pools now today, right? But we know what it's talking about. We know what a community pool is, and this sounds just a notch above like East End pool, or something, in one of our communities today. But what you have to understand is the pool of Bethesda that this scripture is referring to was more of a bath, was more of a place for people to bathe and clean themselves than it was for people to swim laps and play Marco Polo and have fun, right? It wasn't that type of pool. In fact, there was a name given in the Jewish community for this type of pool, and it was called the mikveh, or the mikvah. And this mikvah was a Jewish community pool where people would come for ceremonial cleansing or ritual cleansing. Whenever someone needed to be cleansed, this is the place people would go to. And this was one of the most common, most popular pools inside the city gates of Jerusalem. All kinds of people would come to this pool to clean themselves, especially on hot days. Even if you go to Jerusalem today, you can actually discover this original site of this pool, this actual pool of Bethesda that John is describing here. So this beautiful pool, 5 porches that are covered. And then it reads this way in verse 3. It says this, crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches, just waiting for a certain movement of the water. For an angel of the Lord came from time to time and stirred up his water. And the first person to step in after the water was stirred was healed of whatever disease he had. Now, let me just stop here for a second because there's a few things I need to comment about what I just read here. First is we need to understand that this belief in the power of these healing waters that from time to time would be stirred up, and then anyone who got in, the first person to get in would be healed, was actually probably more of an urban legend than fact. It was probably more of an urban legend than reality. That's why if you were to open up a physical Bible, many of our Bibles today don't even talk about this stirring up of the waters. Most Bibles today, modern Bibles today, will actually keep this out of the original text. You might have to look at the bottom of your Bible to find out about this stirring of the waters, because many people believe that this was more of an urban legend than a proven reality. But here's why I really wanted to include this in today's message, and why I think it's important for us to know this is because this is what people were putting their faith in Jesus' day. many people came, and because many people believed that every once in a while, an angel would come, stir up the waters, and the first one to jump in would be healed of their sickness. Now, I imagine the scene, if it really did happen, I imagine the scene quite like a scene at a water park, okay? I don't know if you've ever been at a water park or recently at the wave pool. It's my family's favorite part of a water park, the wave pool, because about 10 minutes you just hang out in the pool, right? And it's the water's nice and mild. Even on a hot day, it feels great, and you can just hang out and chill and just sit there, right, in the water, and it's awesome. But then all of a sudden, everything changes by a whistle blow. And when that whistle blows, what happens? Everyone gets excited. I mean, adults and kids alike, they get excited and they start moving to where the waves are about to come, right? And you fight each other to get a great position so that you can hit the waves just right. Like, that's how I imagine this happening. This angel comes down, stirs up the water, and everyone's fighting to get in first. Now, I can't prove or disprove whether this was more of an urban legend or this actually happened from time to time. But what I can tell you, what we know from the Bible, is that a lot of people believed this. That's why the Bible says great crowds of people, sick people who've been sick for a long time, they flocked to this pool every day hoping for a miracle. For many of them, it was their last-ditch effort. And if it didn't work, they were done. They had given up all hope. They wanted nothing more than to be whole, to be complete again. You know, I was thinking about that this week. And thinking back to the Garden of Eden. I think everything goes back to the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, you have Adam and Eve, and they decided to go rogue with God and forfeit their life of perfection. And when that happened, humanity lost a lot in the deal. And one of the things that we lost that impacts us even to this day is that we are no longer whole. We as human beings, you, me, all of us, we are no longer complete and perfect. We are now frail and vulnerable, and some might say sick. See, here's the thing. I think sickness is a side effect of being human. Like if the Garden of Eden teaches us anything, and life teaches us anything, is that sickness is a side effect of being human. You see, getting sick is a trait we all share in this room. All of us know what it's like to experience sickness, no matter how hard we try to stay healthy, no matter how good we eat, no matter how clean our house is, no matter how many times we wash our hands. I wash my hands so many times during the day. My hands are so dry at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how hard we try to stay healthy. Sooner or later, sickness will catch up with you. None of us are immune to that. I've told some of you this, but maybe many of you have never heard this, but the 3 months leading up to us getting into this space for our grand opening at the beginning of December was just a crazy time for me personally. And I was like nonstop. And I was going and going and going and going and stressed and going and working and stressed and trying to help organize everything with the teams that we had in place. And I tried as much as possible not to get sick, because I know when I get run down, I get sick. And if you guys like that, as soon as I get run down, I start to get sick. And so I was popping emergencies because I knew I was washing my hands. Anybody that was sick, I was staying away from them. Thanksgiving, my sister and my mom were both sick, and I tried to stay away from them as much as possible, and that was hard. But I was doing everything I could to stay healthy, because I was like, I cannot afford to get sick in this part of our church's history. And sure enough, the Friday before our grand opening, just 2 days before we were going to open up, I got sick. I woke up Friday morning. This was the day that our final inspection was going to happen. And it was an incredibly important day. It was a pivotal day. We were going to get our inspection and we were going to be able to do some things that we couldn't do until after the inspection was done. And so it was an important day. I planned on going and working on my sermon for a couple hours and then coming over here and doing everything that needed to be done. Well, I wake up and I felt like junk. I felt like trash. And some of you guys wake up on a morning and you know that you just feel horrible, but you force yourself out of bed because you know it's an important day. You take a shower. I went to Panera and worked on my sermon for a couple hours, and I was just dead. And I was like, I got to go home. I can't do this. I jump into bed as soon as I get home. I tell Amy Jo, I know I have to go to church, but I'm so sick I can't. And for the next 10 hours, I slept throughout the whole day. I mean, I was sick. And God gave me the power on Saturday to be able to come and help, and Sunday to be able to preach, and God's blessed all of that. But my point is, sickness is a side effect of being human, no matter how hard we try. We're all sick. And I'm not just talking about physical sickness, right? Because that's the thing that we mostly think of when we think about getting sick. It's primarily the people who were at this pool. They were physically sick. And physical sickness can be horrible. It can be debilitating to your life and rob you of many freedoms in life. But there are all different types of sickness in life. There's the physical sickness, right, that we all know of: cold, flu, viruses, broken foot, broken arm, being crippled, blind, having some kind of disease or cancer. But there are all different types of other sicknesses that can be just as depleting in life. For example, there's mental sickness. Things like depression and anxiety and emotional disorders, where our brains just aren't functioning the way we want them to function or the way they're supposed to function. And our emotions are all over the place and they're extreme. Can I just tell you something? I think for far too long, our culture, especially our Christian culture, in too many churches, we've stayed away from talking about mental illness and mental sickness. Can I just be honest with you? We've got to start addressing this. So many of us, because of our culture, because of the world that we live in, it is easy to become sick mentally and deal with depression and anxiety and all these emotions. You know, what's interesting to me is that we'll come alongside someone when they break a leg and we'll be compassionate and we'll have sympathy and we'll say anything you need. But when someone's mind is broken, we want to run. We want to hide. And we need to start addressing that. There's so many of us in this room, that we've dealt with mental sickness and it is no fun. How about this? How about relational sickness? I mean, let's face it. All of us, we all have character flaws that tend to sabotage every relationship that we're in, right? Baggage from our past, our self-image and how low it is, our pride issues, whatever it is. These character traits and flaws that we all have tend to sabotage our relationships. And what often happens in our lives is we'll go through life without any healthy, growing, dynamic, life-giving relationships because we just don't know what it takes because of all the stuff in our lives. And so many of us, we approach relationships and we've already set them up to fail because of everything we're bringing into that relationship. And many of us have experienced relational sickness. And then there's also spiritual sickness, which I know for all of us, we all deal with this sickness. And it's harder to diagnose this sickness because it doesn't happen typically at first on the outside. It usually comes out on the outside after you're really, really, really sick. But most of the time it starts inwardly in your soul and in your heart, and you're just fighting this spiritual battle every single day. And after a while, you just get tired and you get worn down by all the attacks of Satan he's throwing at you. And some days you win the battle, and then other days we lose it. Spiritual sickness, relational sickness, mental sickness, physical sickness, whatever sickness you have been dealing with in your life. My guess is that your desire is no different than the desire of all these people who are coming to this pool in Jesus' day. They wanted to get better. They wanted to live a full life, a whole life. They wanted to be complete more than anything else, especially this guy, verse 5. One of the men who was part of this crowd at the pool of Bethesda, one of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. Can you imagine? 38 years. I'm sick for 3 days and my life is over, right? Like I cry, I whine, I complain, like it is over, right? This guy, 38 years. His sickness, he couldn't walk. He was crippled. Now, we don't know how or at what point of his life this man became this way. But we do know that for almost 4 decades, let that sink in, almost 4 decades of him not being able to get around on his own. Now, being crippled in our world today is incredibly challenging, and there are limitations. But because of advances in medicine and technology, you can live a full life being crippled in our world today. In first century, when Jesus lived, when this happened, there were no wheelchairs. There was no advanced technology or advanced medicine. And so when you were crippled in those days, it was pretty much a death sentence. In fact, they say, history tells us that if you were crippled in those days, most people never traveled more than a half mile from their home, their entire lives. Because think about it, all the detail that needed to happen to move someone who couldn't walk on their own. You had to always have someone help you move. And if you didn't have someone who cared about you in life, you were stuck in one place your entire life. For all intents and purposes, this guy who had been crippled for 38 years, this sickness that he had prevented him from living life. That's really with any sickness that we deal with. So here's this man who's desperately needing these waters to be stirred up, desperately looking for a miracle. And look what happens, verse 6. When Jesus saw him and knew that he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" Serious, Jesus? This guy had been sick for 38 years. He had been waiting by this pool 24/7, just waiting for the angel to come down to stir up the waters. This guy had not been able to move on his own for almost 4 decades, and you're asking him, do you want to get well? Of course he wants to get well. Of course he wants to get better. This seems like such a ludicrous question that Jesus asked this man. In fact, when I read it, it's almost as if Jesus is asking this question, and when he asks it, he's insulting this man. Do you want to get well? But it only seems ludicrous. It only seems insulting to me because I don't know this man like Jesus knows this man. See, Jesus has this uncanny ability in life to look beyond the surface in you and in me, and to go straight to the heart and straight to the soul. He has this uncanny ability to say, you know what, I know what you say and I know what you're doing, but I really know what's going on. Jesus has this uncanny ability to look past everything you want everyone else to think they know about you, but Jesus has this ability to look beyond all of that and say, I really know you. I know what's going on. So maybe when Jesus is asking this man, do you want to get well? He already understands that this man, while he thinks and says that he wants to get well and he's doing all the things to do that, the truth is maybe this guy has grown so accustomed to his sickness for 38 years, maybe this is all he now knows. Maybe because he's been sick for so long, it's now become his identity. I'm just a crippled man who is helpless. See, anything that threatens to change your status quo, anything that threatens to change and mix up the status quo, our comfort zone, even when it is for the good, we tend to reject. See, this guy, in a very distorted kind of way, this had become now his comfort zone. And like this man, many of us, and the sickness that we're dealing with in life, whatever that is, we've dealt with this so long, it's now become a part of who we are. And we've come to accept it. It's now how we see everything. It's now how we see life. It's now how we see ourselves. And in a distorted way, just like this man, it's become our comfort zone. For some of us, that's unhealthy relationships. We grew up with a mom and a dad and a brother and sister with unhealthy relationships, and that's all we've ever known. And so that's all we see out of relationships. And every relationship we enter, we keep on making the same mistakes because this is who I am. This is how I handle relationships. When it gets hard, I run. This is what I do. This is how I am destined in my relationships. Maybe it's your mental illnesses. And you've grown so accustomed to your depression that you just say, it's something I have to live with. I manage. Or you're always anxious all the time, always worrying all the time, and you can't relax and you can't just live in peace. That's just who I am. Maybe for you, it's this emptiness inside that's spiritual, and you just keep pushing God away, and you've never really felt that close to God, and you're just like, I've tried and I can't. It's all I know. It's just how my relationship with God is going to be. See, let's just be honest. It's scary to change, isn't it? It's scary to change from what we know. And it's incredibly difficult to trust in something that will change your life, but you don't know if it's going to work or not. And what often happens in our lives is we begin to convince ourselves, this is something I've been dealing with for a long time, and I just don't see it going away. Things will never change, and I'm just going to have to live with it. It is what it is. And Jesus looks at this man, and he looks at us, and he asks, do you really want to get well? Jesus isn't asking as an insult. He's asking as a challenge to this man. And look what this man, or look how this man responds. Verse 7, he says, I can't, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the waters bubble up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. Jesus says, do you want to get well? And he's looking in the eyes of this crippled man, knowing what he's dealing with. And the crippled man looks back at him in his eyes and says, I can't. Two of the most dangerous words that you can ever speak. I've been a pastor for now 24 years, and I've had so many people that I've sat down with, and we talk about some sickness in their life, because we're all sick. And they say that same thing. Steve, I really, really want to get better. But it just seems like I can't, no matter what, how hard I try, no matter how hard I work. I just can't. I can't because I don't want to be dependent or controlled by medication my entire life. I can't because I'm afraid of how they're going to react to the news or that they will judge me. Steve, I can't. I cannot deal with the consequences of this. Steve, I can't because I just don't know how anymore. I can't because I have no control over this situation or control over the people and what they're doing. I can't, Steve, because I have this limitation or that limitation, and on and on and on it goes. But let's just call that like it is. Those are excuses. Now, they may very well be valid reasons, but they're still excuses. Things that we tend to lean on and use as a crutch to keep us stuck in our sickness. And what I think Jesus is wanting to lead this man to, and what he wants to lead us to this morning, is that we need to confront the excuses. We need to confront the excuses that we're making to ourselves, to others, to God, on why you think you can't get better. You have to confront those things and relinquish their power in your life. It's time to be done with those. Because listen, if you don't get anything else out of today, listen to this. Whatever you're dealing with, whatever sickness you're dealing with, whatever excuses you think you might give, or whatever limitations you think you might have, or reasons why you think you can't, Jesus, listen, Jesus transcends all of that. Jesus has the power to transcend every reason why you think you can't get better. He looks at you and he looks at me and says, yes, I understand you can't, but I can. And that's what he says to this man. He says, I understand you think you can't. It's been 38 years, dude. I get that, but know that I can. Verse 8, Jesus told him, stand up, pick up your mat and walk. I love the next word, verse 9, instantly. Like there was no duct tape or vodka involved in this. I mean, this was the power of Jesus. Instantly, the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. Remarkable. A man who for almost 4 decades did not know what it meant to walk on his own, to get around on his own, who was hanging on by a very thin hope of some powerful local water, now has an encounter with a man named Jesus. And he instantly is healed. That's what happens when you have honest, eye-opening conversations with Jesus Christ. See, Jesus is the ultimate healer in your life, and he will always be the ultimate healer in your life. And that's not just something churchy that a pastor says. This is what Jesus specializes in. Healing our brokenness, healing our old wounds that we've had for years, healing our sickness within. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Steve, that sounds great. Jesus is the ultimate healer. He can do miracles in my life. I get all of that. But how do I tap into that power? How does that happen? What's interesting is Jesus tells us how to do that. He says to us the same thing he says to this man. Look again at what he tells the man. In verse 8, he says, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. He says, stand up. In other words, take action. It's time for each and every one of us in this room, whatever sickness we're dealing with, is to take action. And maybe the start is ask the question right here, right now, today, is what is the next step I need to take to get me on the path to becoming better? That might be initiating a conversation, a tough conversation you know it's going to be, but you initiate it. Maybe a next step for you this week is to ask for help, to go to a family member or to a friend or to a pastor or to a leader or to a doctor and say, listen, I need help. Maybe that next step for you this week that will lead you down the path of getting better is to remove a temptation from your life, or remove a relationship from your life that has become toxic, that is keeping you stuck in your sickness. Whatever it is, it's time to take some type of bold action. When Jesus says, stand up, that was a bold action. Here's a guy who hasn't stood on his own for almost 4 decades, and Jesus says, stand up. Take action. Second of all is let go. Just let go. Jesus says, take up your mat. And this mat was representing this man's sickness. It's what was holding him back from being whole and complete. And Jesus says, let it go. Whatever is holding you back this morning in your sickness, let it go. It might be your past. And something that was done in your past, you got to let it go. Maybe there's just tons of excuses and reasons why you can't. Let those go. Maybe there are people in your life that are become toxic and that are hurting you and that are preventing you from letting go. Let it go. Maybe it's fear. Let it go. Maybe it's an identity crisis that you are in and you've convinced yourself, this is who I am. This is who I am. You need to let it go. And Jesus comes to you and says, I know this is going to be hard, but it's going to be necessary. You've just got to let it go. Trust me in this. He says, stand up, take up your mat, and walk. It's the best part of this, I think. Notice Jesus didn't say, stand up, take up your mat, and try to walk. He says, walk. He says, have faith that I have healed you. And that's exactly what Jesus is coming to you and to me in the midst of our own sicknesses. He says, trust me. Trust Jesus. That he has the power and he has the might and the resources to fight through your sickness and to get you on the other side of your limitations and heal you. Trust Jesus. And the only way that you can really do that is you've got to go all in, right? See, when Jesus told that guy, that crippled guy, to stand up and take up your mat and walk, essentially what Jesus is saying is, dude, you got to be all in with this. Walk. You got to be all in. And Jesus says, when you trust me, you got to be all in. You got to be willing. I will heal you. I promise you. But you got to be all in. You got to listen to me and trust in me and live in me. No more excuses. No more reasoning or justifications. You got to be all in. And this morning, I can tell you that today, in this very moment, as you sit here, you can begin down the path of healing with whatever sickness you're dealing with in your life. And you can start that path of healing right here, right now, today, by simply saying to Jesus, I'm all in with you, Jesus. Man, I've been on the fence and I haven't gotten better, but I'm all in now. And I'm ready for you to heal me. Right here, right now. Let's go. Maybe today is the day that will be a breakthrough for you. And that you realize it's today, in this very moment, that I decide to jump into the water and be healed. Let's pray.